That's it.
And
that's what
welcome back to our press conference. This time we have Prime Minister Honorable Philip J. Pierre and also Ms. Gemma Lafayette, the Director in the Department of Research and Policy. So we will take any questions regarding economic outlook, so that entails inflation, gas prices, supply chain issues, that the director can speak directly to, and also Prime Minister in terms of how these issues affect the revenue of the country and also our ability to spend on social activities, on health, and any other issues of the country. So I would hand over to my media colleagues again. Questions, anyone, or should I start the ball? No? If no one has questions, we can go home. Oh, wow.
No questions.
Okay, so we'll have a little conversation, Ms. Laffy and Prime Minister. We've seen the increase in gas prices probably over the last three terms, because we know we do a pass-through mechanism every 3 weeks.
Right.
What has caused that? Because we see government making $0, but yet still we're being asked to pay more money for gasoline. Could you just explain to Solutions what the process behind that is?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I would just basically outline quickly for benefits of the audience exactly how the fuel prices are determined in St. Lucia. So there is a price build-up formula that is applied to every shipment of goods coming into St. Lucia. And we see that price build-up formula determines the retail price. It comprises three main elements, which are essentially the imported price, which is the CIF price of the product, the margins that have been paid to the wholesalers and the retailers, which is the gas stations and Southern Rubis, example, and also the government's taxes. The government collects two taxes, excise tax and customs service charge. So the retail prices are largely, to a very large extent, influenced by the imported price of fuel. And what we've seen over the last few months is that the imported CIF price has increased significantly. Now, that itself has been driven by two separate factors. We observe, for instance, that the crude oil international prices have been increasing by about 60-odd% in 2022 compared to 2021 last year. And while some may actually regard and basically compare the 2022 crude oil prices with the previous oil price shock in 2008, where the prices actually peaked at $140 a barrel, there is another factor at play here. So quite apart, in addition to the increase in international prices, we have a significant and astronomical increase in the refinery cost of the crude oil to convert it to gasoline, diesel, and cooking gas. So when we add these two factors together, the crude oil price increase, as well as the added refinery cost, which has escalated during the course of this year, we see that the CIF landed cost in St. Lucia has actually gone up significantly. So that has filtered through to our domestic prices. And of course, just to reiterate here that the margins that have been paid to Southern Rubis, which is the wholesaler importer margin, remains fixed since 2009, thereabout, and the retail margin paid to the gas stations is also fixed. So the only variable or the government's policy tool in trying to basically manage and provide relief to the customers is really through the excise tax that the government collects on fuel. So while the government collects a small customs service charge, as is for every other import, which amounts to about 6% of the CIF value, the government has adjusted its excise tax downward in a very significant way, to the extent that it has even gone negative in some periods. So what we see happening is that currently, as of June 13th, 2022, we see that the excise tax on gasoline, which is the main revenue-generating item for the government and the main consumption product of the four main products, it's actually negative 44 cents. But it's not exactly a full subsidy on the gasoline, just to basically make that clear, because the government collects about 92 cents on the customs service charge. So overall, the tax take is positive, but it has been significantly reduced compared to previous period. Just to basically put the context of the excise tax, we've seen that for the previous 3 fiscal years, the excise tax has moved from roughly about $4.50 in the year prior to COVID and it's actually gone down a bit the year after that. So what we actually have seen in this fiscal year so far is that the excise tax rate on average, while we've had some positives and some negative rates, it has actually averaged about 42 cents a gallon. So the government's tax take in terms of dollar value or revenue that the customs collects from Sol and Rubis from the gas sales has gone down significantly to the point that on excise tax and gasoline. So there's always been, just to basically break it down a bit, to basically give you a full picture of how the entire fuel mechanism works. So I just have spoken about the gasoline, and a similar situation happened with diesel. But the biggest relief that the government actually has been given is really with the LPG cooking gas. So the government has always been subsidizing cooking gas, but the extent of the subsidy has more than doubled, or to some extent tripled, over the last 12 months. So as you might be aware, the subsidy on LPG, the 20-pound cylinder, amounts to roughly about $26 per cylinder, and a similar amount for the 22-pound cylinder. And what we've been seeing in recent weeks is that whatever positive revenue the government collects from gas and diesel, it is not sufficient now to basically pay off or to basically cover the cost of the subsidy on the cooking gas. So the government has found itself in a position where, for the first time since the market pass-through was introduced in 2009, where the government has to basically now find the cash to refund the importers, Sol and Rubis, to basically actually continue to actually sell the product to the consumer. I will stop here for now. It's a bit of a mouthful, but in essence, just to wrap it up, to say that the price that we see at the pump, although very, very high by historical levels, is significant, is really reflecting the external vagaries in the international market that we have no control over. We're simply price takers in the world market, and we're all consuming public country. So the government has tried to provide relief for years, since June 2021, last year, till about March of 2021 of this year. The government kept the prices stable to basically to shield consumers from the rising price that actually started back then. But when the war broke out in Ukraine, the government wasn't able to continue to basically provide, to cover that sort of shield to that extent, and there were incremental increases. But yet still, despite these increases in the retail prices, the government's tax take has gone down significantly to negligible amounts, and in some cases to negative revenue.
Okay, and just one question from that. I see we have a question from a reporter. What is the difference? So I know there would have been a projection for, we're in the first quarter, we've just we're now in the second quarter. What was the revenue projection, and what did the government actually make?
Right.
You could tell me.
So if I were to take it a bit more, maybe to respond more on the fiscal year basis overall.
Okay, fiscal.
So for instance, for this new budget year, implicit in the government's approved budget estimates was a projection from excise tax revenue on all the fuel products of about $65 million for the entire year. If we're based on the actual, what has happened so far for the fiscal year, and should international oil prices remain at the current levels with no adjustment to the retail prices, we are expecting to actually be in a situation where the government will be having a net negative revenue collection of about $9 million. But to get back to your question, Mondi, the government has so far from April to present subsidized cooking gas quite significantly to the tune of about close to $5 million. On average, about $1.1 million every 3-week period for the subsidy. And there's been a very negligible collection on the tax revenue on gas and diesel, which has been close to zero for the most part for the fiscal year so far.
Thank you, Ms. Laffey. Kareem, we'll take your question.
Yeah, Kareem Nelson, Odd 7. Crude oil products are rising, the prices are rising exponentially. Just for an example, January 17th, just of this year, a 20-pound cylinder was $32.94. As of the latest update, it's about $43.78. Prime Minister, you have lamented that government makes no revenue on fuel. How much longer can we continue to subsidize fuel if it continues to rise, based on the trends that we're seeing?
Prime Minister.
Oh, yeah, as the economist.
Well, I'm sure you would have two different responses.
I mean, the economist will tell me what a question that is based in in the science of economics, right? So I wouldn't tell you the answer. Well, really, it's a challenge. It's a fiscal challenge. And this is why I said previously, we have to look at our priorities. The government has to look at its priorities. The first answer would be borrowing. Right? We also have issues as far as borrowing is concerned. Our debt to GDP ratio is bordering in the 90s. I mean, it's not at a situation of chaos yet, because some of our neighbors are at $100, but on this current trajectory, it's not looking good. Our other concern would be revenue from tourism. Up to this day, we've not reached the 2019 tourism figures as yet. Our revenue from tourism has not reached the 2019, in 2022. The third source would be from the Citizens by Investment Program, the CIP. And as you know, that program is under tremendous stress, from Europeans under tremendous stress. So we cannot project too deeply into the future as far as the CIP is concerned. But the important factor is we do not know how long the war in Ukraine will continue. We have no idea. We do not know how long this will continue. So we have to measure our responses. Right now we have an issue with flour. Last month, we subsidized flour. We sold flour to the bakers at a cost of, I think, $35 per bag. And the landed cost for flour was over $100. But the government had to actually subsidize in terms of cash into the system so that we could keep bread at its present price. What will happen moving forward is something we are in negotiations with the bakers for. So the answer to your question is we really cannot predict the future because it's so volatile. We do not know what will happen or how it will happen.
Yeah.
So, but we are measuring, and then we are keeping our priorities. We are ensuring that our priorities are kept to a level where the people will benefit. Notwithstanding the fact that we have to continue to pay our debt, because if we default on our debt payments, that's bad for the economy generally.
Any other questions, or should I continue? Continue? Okay. Wow. I have a question on terms of the economic outlook for St. Lucia. Prime Minister, given the issues at hand, and we know, again, we see in the UK, we have reports of consumers adjusting their purchasing habits. We've seen the United States a similar issue arising because of the inflation. And we know St. Lucia has a lot of imported inflation. So what is that? What are some of the policies of the government? And also, what is your message to the citizenry in terms of the escalating food prices going on globally?
First of all, I'd like to ask Ms. Laffey to speak about inflation as an economist. Explain inflation.
Prime Minister, you're an economist.
No. Can you just explain, Ms. Laffey, inflation, what is inflation, important inflation, and stagflation? If you do that, then I can come after you.
Okay.
So you will be explaining it from a strictly scientific point of view as an economist.
Right. So inflation really is the increase. What we call inflation is really what we term consumer price inflation, and what we observe is what you call headline inflation. I'm not sure if you're aware of those terms, but it really is just a measurement of the change in the price level on average that is being measured by the consumer price index from period to period. And so basically, so the inflation rate really is the change, the percentage change in that CPI, the consumer price index, from one period to the next. Now, the consumer price index is measured as is any other economic statistics. And of course, there are some issues with all measurements. But it really is based on a household budget survey that's been done by the Central Statistics Office, where the there's a basket of goods that actually been deemed to be what is an average use for consumers in St. Lucia. And then the pricing of those items in that basket are being monitored through every month. And then that basically generates the data for exactly, that tells you or give you a measurement or a sense as to exactly how consumer prices are actually moving. Of course, in that same basket, you have some things that are more heavily weighted based on people's spending as a ratio of their total income on those. So for instance, in our consumer price index, we have food being the most heavily weighted index. It means that the average person in St. Lucia actually spends a lot more on food than any other products. Also, we would have other key items like, for instance, energy products like electricity, housing, fuel products that we purchase, as well as transport. So these are some of the more heavily weighted indices that actually tend to move a lot more with the imported inflation. So being a country that relies heavily on imports, with quite an open, small economy, a lot of what the purchases of imports from outside of St. Lucia come with prices which move in line with what happens outside of St. Lucia. So that's what we basically would term imported inflation. So an importing these goods into St. Lucia, the consumers here are basically faced with the factors that actually influence those prices in the current environment in a negative manner. So that's pretty much exactly what what inflation really is. It's just basically saying that on average, that the consumer price level or the person's ability to basically buy the same basket of goods from some years ago to today has actually moved and has increased. Regarding stagflation, so typically when you have a mix of high inflation as we have now, and it has a dampening effect on global growth or growth in any economy, we say in economic terms that is a situation of stagflation. So currently, I think someone raised the issue before about the looming recession in the world. So we see now there's been a lot of debate, or a lot of talk or expectations that perhaps the advanced economies like the US, which is our major trading partner, is heading towards a recession. Some think that it's not likely. It's likely over the next 12 months. But others think that if there's timely interventions by those countries, we could avoid a situation where we have stagflation. But nonetheless, having said that, we are in an environment where, having suffered the effects of COVID in 2020-21, and being faced again with this other shock, which is a price shock, which has been triggered, exacerbated by the Russian invasion of, the war in Ukraine, that has had untold damage to prices. So we've seen that producers of a lot of, Ukraine being a heavy producer of wheat and some of the critical products that are used by the world, and also Russia being a very major producer of oil, that these two factors combined have generated somewhat not unprecedented, but a very unusual situation, which we have not seen in the last 4 decades. So prices globally has just risen astronomically, and consumers are pretty much trying to grapple with facing those prices. So we, as a small open economy, and we're faced with very, very high inflation. In St. Lucia, we are looking at an inflation rates just about 5 to 6% for this year. And that, just to put it in the historical context, we had periods where we had deflation, which is a negative change in the price level a few years ago. And we've seen that with the war, that this has plunged us, along with all other countries in the region, and by extension the world, into a very high inflation environment. Prime Minister?
Yeah, and if I can just add, what I want to say is what the government is doing. You heard Ms. Laffey speak about the CPI and the basket of goods. Government has these goods, most of them are under price control, in that the price, the wholesale and retail price, is monitored by the government. Included in that price was a 6% service charge on these goods. What the government has done is the government is losing further revenue by removing that 6% on these goods. So what that would mean is that the new imports would be 6% more if the government had not removed this service charge. So even if the price goes up, because as Ms. Laffey spoke, because the price of the import went up, because the government has removed the 6%, anything you pay for it, it would have been 6% more if the government had not intervened. That is as far as these basic control goods are concerned. So anything you buy now, in terms of, not everything, but in terms of the goods that are under price control, you would have been paying 6% more if the government had not intervened.
But Prime Minister, I also want to say what, because of inflation and the varying in prices so rapidly outside of St. Lucia, it doesn't necessarily mean that the good might be cheaper.
No, but he would have been paying 6% more.
Yes,
Right.
okay.
So the consumer
That's important, yeah.
So the consumer would have been shielded to some extent.
By 6%.
Of course, the government doesn't control much of the price that consumers face, but within its ability to actually do that, the government basically pretty much uses its tax policy to basically adjust it and basically suffer the revenue loss, which would mean it's higher deficits for the government and higher debt. But at the same time, it's trying to basically counterbalance those conflicting objectives of generating sufficient revenue to basically bring down our deficits and our debt levels, and at the same time, basically providing consumers with as affordable as possible prices to basically minimize the adverse effects of these shocks on them. Just as an example, for instance, if the government had not intervened in the fuel prices, St. Lucia, as of now, would have been facing much higher prices, as we see in St. Kitts, in Barbados, and even in Anguilla, which the retail price of gasoline, for instance, hovers around between $18 to $20 a gallon, and yet, but we're still at $17.95. So again, the consumer would have faced a lot higher prices had the government not decided to basically reduce the excise tax take and basically go into negative territory to subsidize, to some extent, some of the products.
Okay.
And then also our VAT rates. Something that we seem to have forgotten. Our VAT rate is the lowest in the entire region, right?
Yes.
It's the lowest. Some countries pay 17.5% VAT. I think some countries pay 21% VAT. I'm not sure about that, but we pay 12.5%. So it's a double whammy. So we're losing revenue from our excise tax, and our VAT rate is lower than anywhere else in the region. And further, we have the most exempt goods, again, as far as VAT is concerned. So whereas there are many exempt and zero-rated goods, such as VAT, in most of our countries, our neighboring countries, there are very few exempt. In some countries, there are zero exempt goods from VAT. So it just shows the peril we face as far as revenue is concerned. Plus our high debt and our short-term debt. The debt we have for the roads, over $200 million worth of road debt, is short-term debt. High interest short-term debt. That debt has to be repaid in 5 years. Normally, debt of that nature is repaid in 20 years. Now, but we have to pay these debts in 5 years. Plus the fact we have payables that stand now at about $100 million. At some point, it was about $150 million. And these payables are due to local suppliers. We have to pay the locals. We have to pay them so that we can generate economic activity in the country. So we are caught with that, and these are not our making. We were not the ones who incurred that short-term debt at 5.5% over 5 years. We were not the ones who incurred it, but we have to pay it, and the revenue to pay it should have come from the $1.50 increase in excise tax. That's where that revenue should have come to pay these debts. We have not got that revenue, but we have to find the money to pay these short-term election roles.
Okay. Prime Minister, my last question to you, and then I guess Ms. Laffey could have some closing words, and so will you. There must be some good news, some good things happening in St. Lucia. I know the economic outlook seems a little dreary, and again, as you have stressed, not by any of our making, but anything that St. Lucians can look forward to in terms of investment opportunities. We know you've been on some recent trips. There's been a heavy focus on green financing and climate change resilience and adaptation. Can you speak to any of projects in the pipeline for St. Lucia?
Yeah, but first of all, let me tell you something about what is of great concern. What's of great concern is climate change. It's a phenomenon that is hitting the world because of the carbon emissions, because of what's happening. And the sad thing is that the countries that are most heavily affected are not the greatest carbon emitters, but we are paying for it. And every time I spoke, whether it was at the Summit of the Americas or at the Corps of Heads of Government Conference, I spoke about the effect of climate change on St. Lucia and the effect of climate change on the region. And I made the point that all the world hears about is when there are big hurricanes, etc. But every day, and it was significant. Why I was saying that we are having floods in Castries. When rain falls, we have landslides, we have floods. And then we have to repair, we have to adapt, we have to mitigate, causing further strain on our fiscal budget. The rains that fell yesterday, I'm sure there are parts in the country where we have to do some mitigation. So climate change is a serious issue, and I really hope that the press and the people of St. Lucia can inform people as to the reality of climate change. In the negotiations for our loans now, we have to put in a climate clause to mitigate against what's happening. There's talk about the vulnerability index, where because of our national income, we are graded as a middle income country. And the reality is we are not, because we are highly indebted. There's work happening now to see whether we can convince the IMF and the World Bank and the international financial institutions to treat us, give us special and differential treatment as far as our loans are concerned. These are the negotiations that are happening. These are the discussions we had in the US, discussions we had with President Biden, discussions we had at the Heads of Government Conference. And this week, I go to Suriname, where these discussions will continue. So these are the realities that we face. Realities of climate change, the realities of high debt, and the realities of crime that I spoke to a while ago. But there is some good news. For the first time in St. Lucia for a long while, we've seen the start of hotel projects. And I'm very pleased to tell you that is just the beginning. You would know that for the last 5 years, we've not had one new hotel project in St. Lucia, not one. Neither before COVID or after COVID. Right now, we've started, there are at least 2 hotels that have already started. Casaba Beach and the extension to Sanders Halcyon. The outlook for the tourism industry is very positive, but again, there are downsides because of the high price of fuel, the cost of travel is expensive, and St. Lucia, as you know, is a high-priced destination. So we have to deal with that. But there are very positive signs as far as our tourism is concerned. In terms of agriculture, we've shipped bananas to England, and I got a report from the Ministry of Agriculture that the quality was good. So we hope to continue shipping bananas to the UK. It's the first time in many years that we actually shipping bananas to UK. And I know I was the butt of humor when I spoke about bananas. But you see what has really happened, that because of my pronouncements on bananas, farmers have got inspired. And they are planting bananas, and the local people are doing many things with bananas. We are adding value, and this was what was important. We have to add value on our banana product, and we are doing that. So that is good. Secondly, in terms of agriculture, we're doing very well as far as our sea moss is concerned. Our sea moss production is increasing. Again, we're trying to add value to it. So there's great demand for St. Lucian sea moss. In fact, there's so much demand for St. Lucian sea moss that a country has created a product that they call Lucian sea moss. So we have to get now to put what is called an identity marker on our products to ensure that when they call it sea moss, it's really authentic St. Lucian sea moss. In terms of our our cultivation of bees, of honey, that is increasing. So there are some good signs. But we need to incentivize agriculture. We need, because of the issues as it relates to food importation, and the issue of food shortages is a very serious issue. This is why in Suriname this week we are going to discuss how can Guyana help in our food security issues. There was a food investment seminar a few weeks ago. What we want to do, Guyana has said that because of the land space they have available, that they can become basically the food basket for the region. So we are having these discussions to improve our food security. But we also have to see about transportation, because you have to move these goods and services between these islands. So it's exciting times, but it's difficult, it's trying. We have to get our priorities right, and then we need to find the mix between social investment, social infrastructure, and being able to meet our commitments as far as our debt is concerned. That is the balance we have to strike. But in terms of the future, it's challenging, but I'm very optimistic about the future.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And Ms. Lafay, just to wrap up, you have some closing time. Based on the economic outlook, St. Lucia and the world, what would be your recommendations to citizens in terms of how they live?
Just to reiterate what the Prime Minister said regarding the global outlook. Of course, it's challenging times ahead, but there is, well, just to go back a bit to indicate that coming from the downturn, the very, very sharp contraction that we had in activity in 2020, our GDP fell by about 25% in that year, and the recovery has started. So last year in 2021, we would have actually rebounded partially to just about 12% from that, but we're still below the pre-COVID levels. We are expecting that, despite the headwinds and the very trying circumstances that the world finds itself in at this point in time economically, that we expect our tourism product to hold its own. Of course, subject to the different eventualities that affect travel, like for instance the pandemic and how that evolves, and then the threat, looming threat, not necessarily the extent to which monkeypox, if at all, would have any meaningful impact on our tourism output going forward. But again, back to the inflation, which is the area of concern for most countries around the world economies. While now the inflation prices, the prices are actually quite high at a very, very 40-year peak, we are expecting, and I think there are some early signs in the advanced countries, that the prices are beginning to ease a bit, and they seem to be coming in a downward. It's still too early to say. Of course, it's unpredictable what the situation, how it actually unfolds, but there is the expectation generally that moving out of 2022 into 2023, that the price levels and inflation will basically subside to some extent over the medium term, over the next 2 to 3 years. And the same applies for St. Lucia. Of course, we're a reflection of exactly what happens on the outside, on the inflation side. But again, of course, with oil prices being very unpredictable, no one knows what's going to happen about how long the war will continue or will be sustained, and to what extent the counterbalancing factors of supply and demand actually weigh in favor of the oil-producing countries. So, for instance, the extent to which the OPEC countries might decide to increase their supply, we're not sure exactly what will happen with that. But we generally expect, and I think the general consensus among industry experts is that those prices actually will be coming down somewhat in 2023. On the real sector side, as the PM would have indicated, and I said earlier, we are expecting that despite these challenges and the very unfavorable economic environment, external environment, the government expects that the tourism sector will continue to rebound towards its pre-COVID levels by about the year 2024, to basically get back to 2019 levels by then. So the outlook for St. Lucia is still somewhat promising amidst the challenges that there are. But of course, we have to basically urge persons in terms of their expectations, to temper their expectations a bit, and to basically do whatever is within their powers, with their control, to basically adjust the spending accordingly to minimize the effect of the high escalating prices on their budgets. Of course, again, to whatever extent persons can, and even businesses, can basically conserve energy and also begin to actually promote and basically increase our food security to help us actually grow more of what we eat and to basically reduce our input bill and therefore to basically reduce our reliance on imports. So it's a challenging time, and it might not be, I think we need to basically ride this wave with some level of confidence and hope that the coming years would still remain promising, and there will be relief along the way sometime in the medium term. I think I would stop now at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Laffey. And Prime Minister, two questions before you give your wrap-up that I had in my notes. We've noticed some, I would like to call it propaganda, in the DFCs. So we understand, you spoke about it briefly in terms of what is owed in terms of roadworks. There was something circulating on social media about the government being asked to pay, I'm not sure asked by whom, to pay for $34 million to Fresh Start road construction. Can you provide any clarification on that matter for us?
Yeah, yes, Moni. First of all, I just want to make it clear that the government has met or is meeting all its obligations. It's difficult, but in terms of obligations towards all these DFCs, the government is meeting them. It's meeting them. Sometimes we're late, but we're meeting them. And not, you called it propaganda, but it's more than propaganda, it's dangerous. There's been absolutely no agreement to pay Fresh Start any money, not 1 cent. There's no agreement. There's no court order. There's no arbitration order. There's nothing. There's nothing that exists to pay Fresh Start 1 cent as far as the Talvan and Shock roads are concerned. And coincidentally, I have a letter from Fresh Start. You see, pushers of propaganda and people who do not speak the truth must always try to cover their bases before they speak of these things. There's a letter dated June 29, 2022 from Fresh Start, and here is what the letter says. It says, we would like to kindly request an update on the status of the above stated claims presented to your organization on December 22nd, 2021. That's a letter. They are requesting an update. So if we paid them $47 million, they would not request an update. I want to tell the public of Lucia that is completely false, completely untrue, and the government, what the government has done is the government has terminated the contract, and then negotiations are happening. But there's been no agreement to pay Fresh Start, not 1 cent. No agreement, not 1 cent as far as the Talvan and Shock roads are concerned. And I can prove, and I have evidence to prove it.
And finally, my last question before Prime Minister gives his closing remarks. Any update on the vaccines as purchased from Radical Investments? I know I'm on behalf of the public of St. Lucia today, guys. I've seen this question a number of times on social media. People wanted to know what the status was in terms of the payment, the refund for the vaccines that we did not receive.
The vaccines that we, in fact, there are certain, there are many things that we're going to put in the public domain very, very shortly, very, very, very soon. We've sat for a year, we've tried to settle the government, we've worked with the technocrats, we've tried to settle the government, we've tried to settle the country after the pandemic, we tried to settle it now because of the Ukraine war. But in the coming year, I can assure the press that many of the unfounded things and many of the threats and many of the things that you will hear are going to be cleared. I can assure you. You're going to be hearing a lot more about St. Jude. You're going to be a lot more about the John Compton Dam project. You're going to be hearing a lot more about the extension, the Rodney Highway. You're going to get a lot more about the vaccines. You're going to be hearing a lot more. I can tell you to tighten your seatbelts. there's going to be a lot that's going to be said about these things. The year was a year of consolidation, a year of settling the government, a year of dealing with the issues. As far as the vaccines are concerned, there has been an inquiry into the vaccines. Fact is, we've not collected the $7 million that was paid. There has been an inquiry. The owner of the company, Radical Investments, he's paid $1 million, and he's paid $1.5 million on the $3 million I think he had to pay. He's paid $1.5 million, and he's promised to pay the rest, which is evidenced by a letter. But as I've said before, you cannot blame the person who provided the vaccines. You can't blame them. If somebody offers you $7 million in advance as a businessman, you will take it. That is just common sense. But I want to just give you a little tidbit of a report that we into the vaccine scenario. Just a little tidbit, and I want to read for you. In a press release from the Prime Minister's office, dated July 1st, 2021, note the date, July 1st, 2021, he stated that the procurement was done in accordance with procurement and stores regulations, and that due diligence was done by the Ministry of Finance. However, we noted from the dates of the documents presented, as well as our review of the direct award procedure being used at the time, we saw no documentary evidence to substantiate that due diligence was done by the Ministry of Finance prior to the signing the agreement and facilitating payment. In other words, the Prime Minister at the time lied. So that is as far as that is part of the vaccine story, and these are not my words. These are words of an independent inquiry that was performed looking into the vaccine issue. So there's a lot more there's a lot more to talk about that issue. But fact is, we've collected $1.5 million, and we are hoping to collect the rest. But it was a bad deal, and the blame must fall squarely on the shoulders of the former Minister of Finance. He was irresponsible, he was hasty, he was reckless, and he paid no attention to the welfare of the taxpayers of this country.
Okay, thank you, Prime Minister. And any closing remarks for the citizens?
Well, as I said before, first of all, I want to thank the staff of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Commerce. It has been trying times. We just came through a budget process. Resources are limited, and then the demands are great. But there are a few things we can report about. We've started the One Laptop program. We've paid facilities fees for students. We are paying CXC fees for English and Maths. We have increased our social spending. We've started a housing program. There are some investments that are on stream. There are some things we can be proud about. Certain things we can be proud about. There's always room for improvement. And the government is completely looking at ways and means of improving, of making processes better, of improving the situation for the people of St. Lucia. We have some serious headwinds. We have some serious challenges, but like I said before, I am optimistic. We're working together with the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance, the technocrats in the Ministry of Commerce. We are seeking the best advice. We're working with our international financial partners. We're speaking to the World Bank. We're speaking to the IMF to see how we can come to a solution that will improve the lives of the people of St. Lucia. Our purpose in politics is to improve the lives of the people of St. Lucia. We are going to be launching our youth economy at the budget at the meeting of Parliament on Tuesday, the 12th of July. We're going to be launching our youth economy, which is an exciting prospect for the young people of St. Lucia. We are also going to be passing our special prosecutor bill, which is going to be able to bring correctness if there is any need for it. I know you've been asking me all the time, what are you going to do? But as I said before, we are a government of principle, we are a government of due process, and I was not about making any accusation without due process or without proof. So I could make the accusation on the vaccines and make the point that the Minister of Finance was reckless and irresponsible because I have the documentary evidence to back it up. I want to tell the public of St. Lucia that I want to thank them. It's going to be 1 year since we're in government. I want to thank them for their support. I want to thank the civil service, the police, the other public officers for their cooperation and the hard work that most of them have put into the system. It's challenging, but it's exciting. We look forward to next year of great promise. But there are many circumstances that are beyond our control that we have little control of. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you, Ms. Laffey, for joining us. And thank you to the members of the media for being present and to the staff of the GIS for accommodating us. Thank you, St. Lucia. Until next time.
Thank you.